So this is the last of the three videos that I'll record, and I think this is a really important discussion that we're having, which is how can we trust the numbers that we're using to develop the cost estimates of a school district split. So first, I'd like to address all of the other studies that were mentioned previously, and I'm looking at this study right here, economies for scale for large school district. I know this was brought up. And I don't believe that this study right here is actually um, valid for Utah. And let me just say why. So this is the same exact article over here. It just by Robertson. It just has a little more detail into it since it's behind a paywall. But one thing I want to point out is their methodology. So they have a hypothesis saying district size will negatively impact the total expenditure per pupil, right? And that's what the West Ed is saying. But in this, the methodology that they use to disprove that is by just doing cross-sectional district level data, so analyzing 99 of the largest American school districts. So this is not Utah specific. And it looks like that they did try to include some other variables in here, except for the Scholastic aptitude test, they didn't get all of those variables. But basically, when they did all of the data in there, um, they are using a linear regression. Again, right here, they're using cost and production functions along with simple linear regression. So there's a problem with just simply applying simple linear regression or the least squares method. And we'll talk about what's called endogeneity. So this was brought up. So when we take a study and we don't have a linear relationship between the two, we can have some issues with endogeneity. We can have some issues where we're not controlling for some variables, and that's important. In this next study, we kind of run into a similar type of issue, which is the study doesn't actually look at large school districts. They confine it to less than 1,000 school districts, and then they just cite other research saying that there is an optimal district size with 2,000 to 4,000. The problem with that is that I think when we try to come up with an optimum school size, we have to make sure that whatever study came up with the optimum school size, it still works inside of Utah. So again, right here, this looks to me to be like another linear regression where basically they took all of the per pupil expenditure and then you across all districts in the United States census in 2013, 2014. And then you're simply trying to put these buckets in here and be like, okay, we're seeing a correlation here that there's a sweet spot. So there's another problem with indigeneity here, which is they didn't control for all of the variables. So if we omit some variables, we can run into the indigeneity problem or omitted variable bias. So if you have a great school district, and maybe that's because you have higher funding, then maybe people will drive further to go to that school district and then the size increases. And so that's another thing of indigeneity, which is reverse causality. And so we have to control for all of these things, and none of these studies make any attempt to, in my mind, control for indigeneity. It seems to be like it's not very rigorous. So here's another example of internal study that was done a while back from University Utah State, and this they have a table here which just looks at similar to the previous study. It looks at school districts with different sizes. So what we're trying to do is remove some of these omitted variables by narrowing. Um, we're going to decrease the indigeneity by narrowing our focus onto school districts in Utah. Utah is different than other school districts. Utah has larger families. Utah has different, ways that their school districts are set up. They tend to be larger than other states. So what we're looking here is over a long period of time, we can see consistently that the larger school districts right here have a average operating expenditure that is lower. And keep in mind that this is looking at not just administrative costs, but looking at all operating expenditure costs, which is what we're concerned about. One of the other problems that we see right here in this is that it's looking at administrative costs, administrative spending, which isn't what we're trying to look at over here. If you're trying to isolate administrative spending, you're missing out on all the expenses, the cost centers in instructors, right? How much is it going to cost to fill those classrooms with teachers? If we're looking at administrative spending, it's just district level admin, maybe school level admin, the principal. But the economies of scale, I believe, are concentrated inside of the teachers and inside of the schools and the other staff besides administration. Also, you see this is a linear regression, and that can cause issues with indigeneity. This is a you can kind of see, at least in administrative costs, there is this non-linear pattern, but again, we're also missing potentially other variables. So omitted variable bias is an issue. So here there is an example where basically if you take the statistics that say if you have more books in your kids' house that are around your kids, that increases their academic achievement. And if we increase their academic achievement, then they can go out and get a job and make more money. So you can see right here, we're taking on the books, we're increasing it. So what's going to happen if I just buy a whole bunch of books and stack them on a shelf? Is that going to result in increased productivity, increased earnings later on when this kid grows up? And the answer is no, because we're missing this omitted variable bias. We have books, but we also have the parent's IQ, right? How, you know, they make up a larger portion of what's going to happen with the academic achievement of their kids than books will, right? Books are just there, they just sit there. So parents make a huge difference, and this is what's called omitted variable bias. And so in a lot of these previous studies that we're looking at over here, doing simple regression, this study over here, I don't think controls for indigeneity, even if it is peer reviewed. Next. So how do we control for indigeneity? So indigeneity is where you have two dependent variables, so y1, y2, and y1 could have an impact on y2. So again, if we're looking at something like school district size, the school district size, I believe, has an impact on cost, but we need to separate some of these other external factors and make sure that we include all of the variables that we need. So if we have an instrument, what we can do is we can remove the indigeneity that basically helps us compensate. So we have these exogenous variables that can help compensate for the endogenous variables. So we have these dependent variables, and then once we have the right set of instruments and variables, then we can go ahead and we can fix that issue. And then we can properly write a function that will help us, without a whole bunch of extra variables, determine what the impact will be if we adjust the district size. So if we look right here in the appendix for the Utah Education Fund study, instead of doing a simple linear regression, they use an IV method to get instrumental variables to control for indigeneity. And so indigeneity is controlled for by introducing a whole bunch of different variables. So you can see right here, we've got a whole bunch of variables like level per pupil expenditures, graduation rate, district enrollment, miles to nearest metro, special education students. All of these things are included, and they're also, we're taking the log of some of these. So that helps us for nonlinear relationship between the two, which wasn't done by the legislator, auditor office, or in their administrative cost study. So what we're going to do is we are going to control for all of these issues and create a cost function by using good practices. And those analysis practices are outlined here. So they use a control function approach or a two-stage residual inclusion. So basically what that means is instead of doing a simpler linear regression, they're actually doing multiple regressions. And so because they're doing multiple regressions, they can double check and make sure with enough instruments that they don't have indigeneity in the dependent variable. So you can see right here, this is the first stage where they're running a regression. Again, they're controlling for nonlinear relationship by doing the logs. And then what they do is they take the error or the residual and then throw that into a second regression. So you can see right here, we have these three residuals that are endogenous variables and they kind of relate to each other, right? So if you have academic growth, then you're going to have graduation rate. If you're going to have higher school enrollment, then that's going to affect other things. And so this study is seeking to control some of those endogenous variables. And then at the end, we can see that we get a cost function that has these triple stars on the coefficient. And so because we have a negative coefficient on, where's it? The district enrollment right here. So we have a negative coefficient right here. So because we have this negative coefficient, then we can conclude correctly that the district enrollment as it grows has a negative impact on cost. And since it's a log right here and a log squared, and then a log cubed, you can see right here, this is the larger term. So it has a higher coefficient, but it is a nonlinear relationship, meaning as district enrollment, if you have the district enrollment, right, then the cost is going to increase because of the negative correlation, maybe a much higher rate than just multiplying it by 2. And so because of this negative correlation factor, then you can see at the end of this, that's why they believe that there are no diseconomies of scale. So you can see right here, outcomes associated with spending district results suggest that economies of scale are present. So none of these other studies attempted to control for indigeneity. They didn't attempt to control for nonlinear relationship. They omitted variables, and therefore they're not valid. And I believe that it's important to learn about indigeneity, and it's important that if you're looking for any sort of analysis, that you look to see if they're doing those things. Are they omitting variables? Are they going through a two-phase linear regression? Or are they just doing one? So I believe, I talked to my brother who's a PhD in this stuff, that it's important to consider these things. And I am not that expert. I am learning along with you and hope that you'll continue to do the same. And thanks for hanging on to all the videos as I learn and you learn and we grow together. Have a great day.